And I knew not to be too discouraged, because I said to people, he's going to alienate so many groups in Kansas that if they'll just wake up, we'll vote him out of office. Now the big question is, are we going to wake up?
What's your prediction?
I haven't got enough feedback yet, and we're a long ways from the election, but check with me probably about August.
So you're predicting that
have
you'll
a
make a
feeling.
prediction?
An intuition. Now, we are very fortunate. Paul Davis was not able to be here today. He's on the campaign trail, and we want him to be on the campaign trail. But we have two excellent representatives from our state government, and that's Marci Francisco and John Wilson. And John's going to speak first, and then Marci's going to come along, and there's going to be plenty of time for you to ask questions, and obviously a lot of you have deep concerns. I want to tell you what I wrote in my last paragraph. I said, I thank you again for being available and willing to speak on this topic in these unbelievably challenging times. I personally appreciate all the courage, calmness, and patience it must take to hold your own against the reactionary, regressive forces currently at work in Topeka. Please help me welcome these two fine representatives.
Good afternoon, everybody. I was here prior to the beginning of the session. How many were here when I came to speak? There was this charming young guy, witty, everything. So I'm glad we can kind of bookend the session. So I think when I spoke with you about what we were predicting, I think it was with Paul Johnson, we talked about all the challenges that we were predicting, and I got to tell you, those challenges were there, and some of them continue to exist. And I would love to come back and report to you that there was an awakening within the legislature, and people have become reasonable and realize that data and people's realities and experiences matter when it comes to policy making. But I don't know that message has set in yet. So. Not a lot to report on that area, but I do want to just talk with you about a few things that have happened during the session, and talk a little bit about the process and what I'm perceiving. And I have to say I'm really excited for what Marci's going to talk about, so I'm not going to yammer on too long. And then, as Phil mentioned, we love to answer questions from you all, because I know this session has generated quite a few controversies and issues that we all think are very important. So just a little bit of background about me for those of you who haven't heard me before. This is the second session of my first term. I was elected in 2012, and I represent the 10th House District, which is basically everything south of 23rd Street all the way to the Franklin County line. And so it includes Baldwin City, southeastern Lawrence, Vinland, and all of that. I don't go any further west than Iowa Street and any further east than the Johnson County line. So that's my district. It's the Fighting Tent. It's one of the best districts out there, I think. And in the legislature, I serve on 3 committees. I'm the ranking minority on the House Children and Seniors Committee, and I also serve on the House Health and Human Services Committee and the House Insurance Committee. I used to be on the Agriculture Committee, but wanted to make some room for one of our new members that came in from southeastern Kansas who had a little bit more of a direct connection to the agricultural community. So if you're like me, you probably would think that based on those committees, I'd be getting to kind of roll up my sleeves and work on some issues that are really top of mind right now. For instance, Medicaid expansion. Are you all familiar with the debate that's happening around Medicaid expansion? Yeah. Okay, good. Informed electorate. I'm actually having a town hall tonight with a group of constituents to discuss Medicaid expansion. But the short story is, we haven't done anything with it. The governor hasn't said yes, the governor hasn't said no, and with each passing day we lose out on money that we've already been contributing to the federal government to pay for health insurance for upwards of 150,000 Kansans who desperately need it. Kansas has some of the most restrictive Medicaid requirements in the country, and so we find ourselves in the situation where people make too little income to qualify for any kind of affordable health insurance, either on an exchange or through expanded Medicaid. And it's a really tragic situation that we're in. And so neither my Children and Seniors Committee nor the more appropriate Health and Human Services Committee even had a hearing on Medicaid expansion. Yet we've had the opportunity now for 2 sessions to discuss it, and that hasn't happened. I have some theories on it, and I honestly think that on any issue where it really there is not a solid reason why we shouldn't be doing something, other than it doesn't mesh with the political ideology or perhaps some of the people bankrolling some people in office, then we're not going to hear it. Whether we're talking Medicaid expansion or even things like excluding people with developmental disabilities from CanCare, we never even had the opportunity to debate that. It was always moved to committees that were friendly to it, or not allowed to even run bills on the House floor that might be able to have amendments attached to them to even debate it. So we haven't even touched that, haven't had any formal hearings on Medicaid expansion. Some other things that have been interesting in the Children and Seniors Committee is, are you all aware of the TANF program, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families? It's cash assistance, and it's generally lumped together as welfare, and also includes other programs like SNAP, which we call food stamps. Kansas right now is sitting on about $48 million in TANF funds that are unspent, and that's $48 million that could be going towards families that are struggling with food security, families that are struggling to pay their monthly rent, struggling to find affordable child care. And thankfully, we had the opportunity to speak with the Secretary of the Department of Children and Families in my committee, and I have to say it was a very uncomfortable setting probably for her, because I wasn't holding back anything. I think it's incumbent upon me as a ranking minority to really ask those tough questions. I'm not there to make friends. I'm here to make sure that my constituents and Kansans are being taken care of. And honestly didn't get any terrific answers as to why we sit on $48 million of funds when we could be going to job training and, again, all these different ways to support families. What's particularly troubling to me about this is, if you look at the Kansas economy, poverty in Kansas right now, roughly 390,000 Kansans are below the federal poverty line and in poverty. And so if you were to make that a city, it would be a city larger than Wichita of impoverished people. In addition to that, 6 of the 10 fastest growing jobs in Kansas right now keep a family of 3 in poverty. And so we've heard all this talk about job growth and job creation, but are those really the types of jobs we want? Where even if you're working 40 hours a week, or in some cases having more than one job, you still can't make ends meet. I think that's morally objectionable. So we have 390,000 Kansans in poverty. We have 6 out of the 10 fastest growing jobs keep families in poverty. We have an increased utilization of Medicaid. We have more people who are in need of food assistance, yet we still sit on $48 million in funds. And the Secretary did say, well, we can never know when there might be some tragic event that happens that might require us to use those funds, like a tornado or something like that. And I said, there is kind of a tragedy happening, and there is a tornado of sorts happening with our economy, and this is exactly the reasons we should be using these funds. But again, no real movement on that issue. And again, I find that especially troubling. Let's see, some other areas. I have to say, I don't want to talk about all the bad things that have happened. Some good things have actually come out of our work. On the Insurance Committee, we passed a bill to provide insurance coverage for people on the autism spectrum. So it's been a several-year fight to get some form of coverage. And I have to say, it doesn't go as far as I'd like it to go, but it does at least provide a pretty reasonable amount of therapies for people with autism spectrum disorder, and but it only will actually cover about 800 or so families outside of what the state health insurance plan already covers. But I think it's a step in the right direction. It's a small step, but quite honestly, if you sat in on that hearing, the big debate was whether or not insurance companies would kill the bill over on the Senate side, and the House shouldn't really mess with it too much, or else it's not going to go anywhere in the Senate. And I'm of the position that the House needs to create the best bill possible that's going to help the most amount of people. And we're not here to please insurance companies, and we're not here to please the Senate. Let the legislative process work like it's supposed to work. But there were literally lines like, well, the insurance companies don't want to pay more than 31 cents per covered life per day. And so we can't go any higher than 31 cents. And heaven forbid that we go to 50 cents per covered life per day. So again, small step in the right direction, good thing. And I think the governor is having a signing ceremony today to sign that bill into law to provide coverage for autism. I'm trying to think of some other things that might be of interest to you all. Actually, the one thing that's been disappointing to see is a continued push to repeal our renewable portfolio standard. Are you all familiar with the RPS and what that means? No. Okay, for those who don't, Kansas several years ago enacted a renewable portfolio standard, which basically says energy companies need to get a certain percentage of their energy from renewable sources. In our case, it's 20% by 2020. And the great news is that almost all energy companies in Kansas have met that goal. And if they haven't met it, they're very near to meeting it, years before our deadline to do so. But there are some interests that really think that renewable energy, and particularly a state mandate to invest in renewable energies, is inappropriate and picks winners and losers, is unfair to the market, and so on and so forth. So there's a significant push, particularly on the Senate side, to repeal the RPS. And I'd say the push is not coming from energy companies. It's coming from the chamber. It's coming from people who fund the chamber, like Koch Industries. And that's especially troubling because you look at Kansas, our resources, we are like the Saudi Arabia of wind when it comes to wind capabilities. We have the ability to generate wind here in our state, and with developing transmission lines, export it to those states that don't have great renewable energy resources like we do. It also has shown
Today
that,
is an example.
what's that?
Today is an example.
Right, today is an example, yes. And soon we'll be able to find a way that hot air in Topeka can somehow generate. But for now, we'll take this. But you're right. And one thing you might hear if you do any digging on the RPS and people who want to repeal it, they say, well, it's driving up the cost of energy. The reality is it's less than, I think, 0.5% of utility increases are a result of wind energy and renewable energy. Quite honestly, most of the increases are coming from mandates from the federal government to clean up dirty coal plants. And so the interesting thing is even if we were to repeal the RPS tomorrow, energy companies have signed long-term power purchasing agreements with companies that lock in incredibly low rates for energy. And so this is good for their bottom line. And if we take away the RPS, that doesn't mean people are going to stop investing in energy. Those are locked in, and they've even said that increased access to renewable energy will probably help keep costs low or make them go down. So wind right now in particular is coming close to being very competitive, if not more competitive, with coal generation. So look for, actually I think there will be Marci might disagree, but there's probably going to be a push in the veto session in the next few weeks to try to repeal the RPS again. Even though we blocked it in the House, I think they're still going to try to do it because the chamber is very interested in getting rid of it. Let's see, rather than talk about any other pieces of legislation, I want to talk just a little bit about the environment in Topeka right now. I think as we discussed when I was first here, there's kind of the balance of power is a little bit lopsided in Topeka. If you recall, there are 125 state representatives, 33 of whom are Democrats, and on any given day, 21 to 25 moderate Republicans, and the rest are pretty conservative Republicans. And then on the Senate side, there are 8 Democrats and, 1 or 2 moderate Republicans out of 40 senators, plus Governor Brown back in office. And so what that allows the majority party to do, in this case Republicans to do, is pick who are the chairs of committees, and those chairs of committees get to pick what bills they hear and what bills they don't hear and don't want to work. And as a result, we get some really, we focus our energies on the wrong thing. Again, we could be focusing on Medicaid expansion, expanding renewable energy in Kansas, funding education without crazy education policy attached to it, doing all kinds of great things that help the most vulnerable Kansans. Instead, we do things because committee chairs have their own ideas of things, like have live ultrasounds during Senate health hearings, or we we decided to repeal the RPS, or have laws that take away local control for handling guns, and all of those things. And so there's just a willful disregard for policy and ideas that are genuinely going to help people out. And instead, we are spending our time disproportionately on bills that help certain industries and people who have the money to influence lawmakers. And I think Marci will talk a little bit more about that. And so, because of the supermajorities that Republicans have, as I mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of opportunity for genuine debate about things. There's various maneuvers that you can do to keep the minority voices from participating. So if a bill looks like it could be a good vehicle for somebody to attach a Medicaid expansion amendment to, then they're not going to run it on the floor. What they'll do is they'll hold on to it till the end of the session, and they'll go to a conference committee and put it in a conference committee. And if you're not familiar with what a conference committee is, it's when the House and Senate both work a bill, or their versions of bills, and then they can't agree upon it. So they come together in a room to work it out. And there's 6 people on a conference committee, 4 of whom are from the majority party, and 2 of whom are from the minority party. So 4 Republicans, 2 Democrats. And again, because these are the chairs and co-chairs of a committee, or vice chairs of a committee, it means they are most likely conservative Republicans dominating conference committee, at which point they can take any number of bills and stick them into a conference committee report. So you might have 4 really terrific ideas that are going to help people, and it's bundled with one incredibly awful bill. And then you are forced on the floor to vote yes or no on it. There can be no adding amendments, nothing like that. And so I actually think a terrific example of it would be this education bill that passed finally, where we originally started off with a clean funding, essentially a clean funding bill. It didn't do everything we wanted to do, but it was at least going to fund schools. And in the wee hours of the morning, it was bundled together with 2 significant pieces of education policy. 1, taking away due process rights for teachers, and 2, providing tax credits for corporations to essentially fund vouchers. And so there was no opportunity to debate the due process issue, no opportunity for experts and testimony. It was just bundled together, and all we could do was debate it on the floor, but again, without the assistance of people who are affected by those issues. And then again, all we could do is vote yes or no. We couldn't amendment, we couldn't do anything like that. In addition to that, one thing that we've seen is, because last year we instituted a 2-year budget, any additions to the budget or changes to the budget are very narrow in focus. And because the majority party sets the rules for the chamber, we have what we call pay-go in both the House and Senate. It means you can't spend any new money without offsetting it from something else. If we were dealing with a normal budget, you could say, well, I want to increase education funding by taking it from corrections funding. But since our budget is 2 years and we've already passed the bulk of the budget, any budget adjustments that come forward are narrowly focused. So for instance, education. So they narrowly apply the pay-go rule so that if you're going to add funding to one area of the education budget, it can only be taken from another area of the education budget, not somewhere else in the entire state budget. Does that make sense? So again, we're very narrowly focusing what we can do to try to invest in programs that we know work or that would benefit more people. So at the end of the day, I think it can be summed up by just saying that the supermajority that Republicans have means they can really stifle debate, and they can exclude voices, and they can use the rules to their advantage, and they can manipulate them so that great ideas don't get heard, and ideas that need to be heard can get rammed through without a lot of public input. And if you're like me, you find that especially troubling. And so, with that good news, I think I'm going to let Marci come up here. And again, I'm really excited to hear from you and answer your questions. And apologize if anything I said was a little bit confusing or again depressing. Thank you all.
Thank you, John.
So certainly, we don't expect the House to send over things that just things that the Senate wants. But I do want to say I appreciate what Representative Wilson has worked on, and I pay attention to things that he's sent over. And he needs to take credit, I think, for the amendment to restore the adoption credit back in tax bills. So I want to thank him for that. So, again, I'm Marci Francisco. I have had the pleasure of representing the 2nd District in the Senate for the past 10 years. The district expanded when we redrew the district. So instead of just areas in Douglas County, I used to always be able to say Lawrence and Lecompton. I now have to add almost all of Jefferson County. So that's been very interesting to have that rural flavor. I said a little bit to Representative Wilson about some things that I have been thinking about related to the legislature. Certainly I want to start off by saying I understand that life isn't fair and don't expect the processes always to be fair. But we had a debate this year on the mortgage registration fee. Were any of you watching that or following that? It's a little bit of an aside because you only come into finding out about this when you're applying for a mortgage or actually when you're filing mortgage papers. And counties have been collecting since 1926 25 or 26 cents on every $100 of that mortgage as a mortgage registration fee. Some rural banks have been concerned because they believe that federal farm credit agencies had an unfair competitive advantage because they have some federal ruling that allows them to exempt themselves from this fee. So they were saying in a rural area, people can get paid less for their mortgage because they don't have to pay this fee. So the Senate Tax Committee thought that they would look at that. Understanding, however, that counties have been relying on this income, and it's a considerable amount. So there was a proposal made to charge by the page instead of by the amount. So, and this makes many rural counties, I think almost like 95 or 96 of the rural counties whole. It still leaves Johnson County, Sedgwick County, Shawnee County with less money to deal with. But I was feeling like, well, why is this fair? All of a sudden now, someone who's getting a mortgage for $100,000 is going to have to spend every bit as much, if they're the same number of pages, as a person who's getting a mortgage for $1 million. And then you think other mortgages, maybe for a shopping center